Hello and welcome to Soloing the Deep Desert series. We've asked the question and covered it extensively. Can you solo the deep desert? Well, now that Dune Awakening is officially released, let's go on a journey to learn and understand how the deep desert works and is it actually going to be possible as a solo player? So skipped a bit ahead, we're traveling in the deep desert. I have a tiny little base in the PvE area, which I'll show you later, but I came across this crazy bug that I have to show you guys. And you got to be very careful in the deep desert, particularly as a solo player, and make sure you know the daily downtimes for your servers, because check this out. So I'm flying along thinking there's no issues. And then suddenly my ornithopter starts sort of rubber banding. And I was really hoping it was just something to do with crossing the server. But as I crossed into the sector H1, the same issue. I couldn't gain any altitude. And things only got worse from there. So I thought the best option is to try land the vehicle, and I was very, very lucky to be able to find a spot so close. And I went to land the ornithopter, and then I went to exit the vehicle, and then suddenly I'm teleported to sector F2 and in quicksand. Like, what the is going on? This was brutal. So whatever was going on, it was really hard to determine if it was because the servers were going down, which I didn't know, because they were going down probably within the next 15 minutes, but something strange was going on. But this isn't the first time I've been teleported to quicksand. When I got disconnected the other day, I teleported to quicksand in another random region. So there's some very big bugs to be solved here. And unfortunately, there was no real way to escape this scenario. So I would die in the quicksand thinking I could respawn at my vehicle. Where's my vehicle? Well, vehicle is all the way in H2 where I left it. However, clicking on the respawn to the vehicle just teleported me back to another different quicksand. I don't know why. It doesn't matter what I do, it would just teleport me to a random quicksand. But luckily, I did have a backup ornithopter, so I was like, sweet, I'll be able to hopefully rescue the assault ornithopter, because as a solo player, it is huge if you lose that. That's a lot of time and effort gone. So I've jumped in the backup ornithopter, which I always suggest you carry. Do have rockets on it, and that can be a good way to be able to get you out of a tricky situation. So on the way to the ornithopter, I knew it was sort of roughly in this area, so I made my way. I was getting so close to my assault ornithopter, and then I came into the same problem in this second ornithopter. The rubber banding, not being able to gain altitude, and things got even worse from here. I can't gain altitude, I can't really move forward, so I thought I'd quickly try at least put my ornithopter back into the backup device, and then this happens. The vehicle goes crazy, and then I spawn back to quicksand in some random fucking region. I don't get it. What is even going on? And this is what you have to be prepared for, as there's still lots of issues. So I tried to restart the game, but it just spawns me back into quicksand. So nothing I was doing was actually working. And by this point, I was extremely frustrated, thinking that I was doomed. Important to note, in these sort of situations, you do have the option to spawn in Haga Basin. But if you do that, you will lose everything. It's like being eaten by a worm. So that's not really an option. The only other option is to go to the base in the PvE area. And then there is a location where you can catch a lift home to Haga Basin and you won't lose your stuff. But I was trying to avoid that because I have 2 ornithopters now lost in the deep desert. So the struggle continued. I knew that the ornithopters were still there, luckily, because they're sitting there with their icons. So I was very hopeful that I could get there somehow. Even if I had to go and lose everything to get to Haga Basin and fly out and capture them, it'd still be worth it, because that assault ornithopter being so precious, it's a big deal to lose it. After restarting the game, I really panicked. It looked like there for a moment my character was gone and it didn't exist at all. But this is when I realized that something is going wrong with the servers. Looks like the Aussie servers or Oceania servers go down at 5 a.m. every day. So be mindful of that. Don't be in the deep desert then unless you're somewhere safe. So the servers came up temporarily and I was able to open up, and I went to try respawn, but the same thing kept happening. But then suddenly, sometime after the server restart, things started going my way. I was able to finally respawn back at my assault ornithopter, cheering. Now I had to go collect the other ornithopter, and this is good to know. So if your ornithopter is just parked in the deep desert, generally it's safe for quite a while. I don't think the worm is attracted to them unless they're hovering or making any kind of movement. So there is a good chance you can recover it. If you've ever accidentally jumped out of them or get disconnected, there's a good chance they're still there, as long as they don't land in quicksand. And here I've been able to grab my second ornithopter. And this is where the journey actually kind of begins. So do note, at the moment, I'm running rockets on both the assault and the small ornithopter. And this is a good tactic to do while you're flying out to find the location. This way you have very strong offense. And with the assault ornithopter, you've got quite good defense too. Now that I've got some momentum and everything's looking my way, I stumbled across a parked ornithopter. And this is kind of my first encounter of using the missile launcher on an ornithopter, and the whole experience was very interesting. The aiming is quite difficult to do, and I can see why people say they go through hundreds and hundreds of rockets, because it's going to take quite some time to get the aiming and understanding how it all works, because it doesn't really go to where you think. I was also curious to see how long it would take to actually destroy an ornithopter, and this looks like a tier 6 or a Mark 6 ornithopter, so this is as strong as they get from what it looks like to me. Let me know in the comments if that's not the case, but this looks like the strongest one. So we're just going to fast forward here, but it takes ages. It took many rockets in a long time, and the overheating is really where the skill and trick is going to be, as well as landing those shots, because you have to manage the temperature as well as being able to make crazy predictions about where your enemy's going to be. At least that's how I imagine it's going to go down. As we get into some dogfights, we'll sort of learn a lot more. Definitely a bit of an experiment, and it looks like this poor sort also probably got disconnected or is parked there. But his base is just around the corner, and I needed to get out of this area. Their base being a Harkonnen, it could be one of the Zerg guilds, and they look like they're very well set up there. So they haven't been disturbed, and it doesn't look like there's too much competition in that region. But it's quite a big base, so I assume there's quite a few people there. It didn't look like they had an assault ornithopter either, but perhaps it is hidden in the building. So I decided to head off, and we're going to go find and try get as much of the endgame resources. That's the whole point of this, is to try get some back to my base. And as I went along, I came across this rock face. Now what's crazy is I didn't even notice that there was an ornithopter right on the bottom right there. Had no idea, didn't even see it. But perhaps this is someone else who lost their ornithopter during the disconnect or the reset. Not even knowing it was there, I was just hovering around. But at the same time, you're in the assault ornithopter, so I imagine having so much more health, it can take quite a beating and allow us to get away at least, or engage in combat. But all I'm trying to do here is just have a look at the region to see if there's any players' bases and the makeup of resources, because you need a ton of the endgame resources to really get anywhere. And you really do need to kind of set up a base out in the deep desert. So that's sort of the aim, flying over a couple different regions. And this spot was definitely looking promising. Now, the only trouble is where are you going to put your base that is well hidden, or at least not in an area that's so easily viewed? So I decided to check out some of the rock formations a bit further over, hoping that this would be a less visited area, as it's almost one of the last stops before the deep desert ends. Scouting out the players, it looked like it had some excellent places to hide a little base. So I decided this is where I'm going to put something down, because it's quite well hidden, it's at the back, and I was hoping that I could get a little base so I could start actually storing and getting some of these endgames resources. Now the trick is when you're building a base out in the deep desert is don't do what I did. I didn't come very well prepared, and this is where a checklist really comes in handy. You need to bring everything with you. If you want to set up a little base, you're going to need to bring the power, the scrap, all the little bits just to get it going. And you need to kind of double layer the structure in order to protect your sub-thief. Because what will happen, people will wait for the storm to happen, and they will try get into your base by destroying the walls and the doors to break in, to destroy your sub-thief, but more importantly, to destroy your containers. So it's really important you try hide your sub-thief, or build multiple layers of walls that they have to get through to slow them down while the shield comes back online. So I wanted to put the sub-thief right in the corner and then kind of lock it in and try to put as many layers of walls around it, just so I had some kind of protection, because I've been raided before and you don't want that to happen. The idea though is to not store too much here and make sure you are transporting it back. But I made this fatal mistake of not bringing any fuel with me. It was very early in the morning, so that was one of the downsides. However, I did go try search for it, and I scanned all the surrounding rock formations, but there's nothing. Not any kind of power at all. No scrap, nothing. The only resources you're going to find around these rocky formations are pretty much the endgame resource. Sometimes you'll get lucky, but a lot of the rock formations are completely barren of everything else, making it very difficult when you make mistakes like this. So you really have to do a checklist, be very prepared, make sure you've got everything you need, have a solid plan. But in any case, I kept going, and I was going to just build a little base in hope that people wouldn't figure out that I didn't even have a shield generator going on, and that I could try to protect a little bit of the base as much as possible just by building lots of walls and roofs. Now, it's important to keep the assault ornithopter lock and loaded. Don't have the inventory on. Then use your smaller ornithopter, but don't set it as your respawn point. Keep your respawn point to the assault ornithopter. In case anything happens, you can then quickly, if you do die, get teleported back to your assault ornithopter. And this way, we're very prepared if we do get in an engagement. Because if you have nothing to fight back with, they're definitely going to just pick you off. You need some kind of offense so that if they do try, you can at least try fend them off and they might think twice. But ultimately, it is very important to just take your time with this and just do the trips. I'm going to use my small thopter to just transport all the resources back and forth to the base, and I've been able to craft few little small containers just to make it worthwhile to make the storage. And I highly recommend having a scanner on your ornithopter to really help make locating all the resources very quickly, particularly if you were in the situation where you forgot something like fuel. If you have a scanner, it can make it much easier to detect. The other thing I forgot to mention is that I picked this spot because there was no other bases around. You really don't want to be flying or operating in any areas as a solo player where there's another base, particularly if it's a big base. Most likely a guild, they'll have a couple thopters, won't be a good time. So if you can get lucky enough, you can find rock formations, at least right now, that do have next to no one or aren't occupied. But it is worth noting these sort of rock formations will become more valuable as time goes on, so they will be more contested. And that's where we'll have to go on to some of the much closer formations to try and get our resources. It would just take perhaps a lot longer because there's a lot less nodes. You might find like 1 to 4 on some of the rock formations, whereas out here at the far reaches on the other side of the deep desert, you can find a plentiful amount of them on these rock formations. Some of them are absolutely covered in them, but that's where you're going to find the guilds and the big sweats. So continuing on, I was just jumping in my thopter, grabbing the resources, dropping it off the base, keeping the assault thopter locked and loaded just in case. I made a couple of adjustments to the base to hide the subfief, just making sure there was multiple walls I'd have to go through. I can try protect it without a shield. Now the only time I saw another person in this whole venture was when I was taking off just after dropping some of the resources. I popped over a mountain and I saw someone gliding, but I did try to talk to them and that was it. That was my interaction in the deep desert. Now luckily that guy probably only had his inventory on. When I try to talk to him, I always say that we come in peace, just in case. Saying that now, people will be onto me. In many cases, there's a lot of other players probably not wanting the hassle, as well as the player definitely saw the assault ornithopter, probably realizing it's not going to be worth his time. Now, my worry is whenever this sort of encounter happens is that they're going to go back to base and grab some of their friends. Being this kind of time, that's probably less likely, but it's always on my mind. So now I want to try get through the resources and try make my way back as quick as possible. So I'd mined all the resources in one rock formation. I wanted to check another, so I did get into the assault ornithopter just to scout it out. My thinking was this is probably a better idea as it is a bit tankier, but it is a lot slower. So it's going to be a bit of testing to see how this actually performs in combat, but I'm sure we'll get plenty of that. And this is one of the interesting things about the deep desert is you'll have these kind of rock formations that are just completely filled with aluminium. It could be iron or it could be another lower tier resource. It's worth noting there was no fuel on this rocky formation either. And it's also not a bad idea just to bring a hand scanner too, so you can scan some of the areas as well. But once I sort of sussed this area out, I was like, yeah, it should be okay. I can bring over the other thopter and start harvesting this area. As the sun came up in the beautiful Arrakis, I was hit with one of the more unfortunate events in these kind of situations is a huge spice field exploded, letting everyone know on the map or everyone within quite a large vicinity that there's spice here. Now, generally, you'd probably want to move away right now in these locations as this could attract a lot of people. I was going to risk it and try to get more and more resources just to make sure I could try to get at least a full ornithopter assault. But definitely pay attention, but definitely be on high alert. If you ever get a spice blow near your base, be very cautious as it will be attracting other people. Same can be said for the control points. Control points can do the same thing. When it was time to leave, I just reconfigured the base. I wanted to ensure that my subfief at least could be protected with a few extra layers of material. So I built a much bigger and sturdier, at least I think about 3 walls to be able to get to my subfief. So without a shield, that still probably is quite easy if you have some of the late game gear, but also quite costly. So I was hoping that would be enough to avoid someone giving it a try, as well as nesting it in that little hidey hole, hoping that it can survive. I was extremely cautious leaving the deep desert, so I headed towards the end of the deep desert to avoid where I knew the bases were in some of these other rock formations. So I'm going to travel all the way across and then head straight down, pretty much following the barrier. Now you do have to be mindful, this could be a tactic that other people use, but you're just trying to avoid other people just so you don't have to get into an engagement. But after flying for maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes non-stop, we finally made it to the sanctuary of the PvE area, where I set up a little base, just sort of like some foundation, a landing pad with some water and some storage. It's all I really need right now. And this is all it is inside, just a couple of generators, plenty of storage, excellent amount of water, a little place where you can just drop things off and then it be an in-between. Knowing that I forgot fuel and scrap, I went and scouted the area, and there's so much in the PvE area. You'll find all the materials you need. Some are a bit harder. Granite can be quite annoying to find, whereas aluminum, basalt, and some of the others are quite bountiful, but things like copper are rare, so you really do need to be prepared. But I did find plenty of fuel, so I'll make sure I'm going to grab that and take it with me next time. Well, we've pretty much completed our run. Now, this took about 2.5 hours, mainly because of the disconnect and the issues I had. But heading out of the deep desert, our next stop on the world map was just to hit one of the major cities, with the only intention of just checking what we have been able to sell. Now, if you're not using the store market, I highly recommend you do. It's a great place to earn tons of cash. Some items are definitely worth more to others. And as you can see, I've sold a ton, getting me to the place where I nearly have 1 million Solari. Now, there's nothing left to do but process all this excellent resources that we've got. So that 2.5 run, 500 titanium and 735 of the star divium, or whatever it's called. But let's process this down to see how much we get. The assault ornithopter wasn't completely full, and neither was my inventory, so you could probably get quite a bit more. In order to process the stravidium, you will need to build the medium chemical refinery. That doesn't take any of the final tier material. Everything you need is in Hager Basin to build this, but normally it takes about 4 to create 1 of the stravidium fibers. So with 500 titanium and 245 stravidium, we can do 100 ingots. So that is 2.5 hours, 100 ingots. Crazy amount of work and effort. This is why doing it solo is going to be very slow, but as you can see, possible. But there we have it. This was part 1. I'm going to try to do this quite regularly. Let me know what you think. If you did enjoy it, consider liking, subscribing. Thanks very much. Peace.